Hi, this is Electrolysis of Water, Investigation 7.1 on page 146 and 147
Here it is.
in your book. So we know, when we've talked about water multiple times, that water is a combination, it's a chemically bonded molecule of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. In order to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, we have to create a chemical process. It's not a physical process that could just pull off those hydrogens from the oxygen. So let's see if we can do this. What we're going to start with is two containers of distilled water. Distilled water just means that it's pretty much as pure as you can get it. There's no ions floating around and no other impurities. And so I have two distilled waters. The question is, do we think water can conduct electricity? Is it a good conductor of electricity? So we're going to test that by our audible electricity tester. Let's show you how that works. If I add it to the water, we don't hear a sound. If I touch the electrodes together, you can hear it. If I touch something metal, the electrons are moving from the battery to the wire, through the pan, to the wire, and then out to the buzzer to make a sound. If we do that in regular water, there's no transfer of the electrons through the regular water. But let's see what happens if I add some sodium sulfate to the water. A sulfate is similar to a chloride. Let's see if that changes the conductivity of the water. Now, the electrons can travel from the battery through one wire, through the water, to the other wire, and to the buzzer. So we know that sodium sulfate can conduct electricity. We're going to need that in order to try and separate our oxygen and hydrogen. So you take a look at number 5 on page 146 and see if you can answer those questions A, B, and C to yourself. Pause the video here. All right, let's start with number 6 and set up our electrolysis. I'm going to place an electrolysis stand in our plastic container. It's just a positive and negative electrode that eventually we will hook up to a battery. Negative, we know, is usually, in the United States, we try and use red for the negatives and we use black for the positives. So I'll put that into my container. We're then going to take the solution that conducts electricity and pour that until it's covering the bottom of the electrodes. I have 2 glass test tubes, pretty small, and I want them to be full of my solution. So I'm going to then flip one over onto the negative electrode. And then I'm going to flip one over onto the positive electrode. And you'll notice on top there's a little bit of space, so I'm going to do this one again. I want to try and just get it as full as possible. Alright, it's not too bad. I'm going to add a little more solution just so that our electrodes are covered. Test to make sure it's still conducting electricity. Now we're all set up, so we want to look at number 7 on page 147 and discuss these following questions with anybody that's around, or see if you can answer this yourself. What do you think will happen when we pass an electric current through that water? And what do you think will happen if we didn't add the sodium sulfate to the water? Well, let's go on to our next steps and see what happens. We want to hook our red wire up to the negative electrode on the battery. You just do this that way. We're going to hook the black one up to the positive electrode and try not to knock everything over. We're just going to leave that there for a second. And if we can look closely at what's going on in the test tubes, you'll see there's bubbles being created in each test tube. We're just going to let that bubble for a while. You can leave the video on, but I'd like you to read steps 1 through 11 if you have not done that yet. So what can you see happening in both of these test tubes? Yeah, there's bubbles being created, but does it look like there's more in one than in the other? And in which one is there more being created, more bubbles being created, in the negative or in the positive? We're going to let this run for about 5 minutes to see what happens. Hi, we're back with part 2 of electrolysis of water, investigation 7.1. Remember, we're trying to separate water into its component parts, oxygen and hydrogen. We want to chemically separate those two atoms in the molecule. In order to do a chemical reaction, we can use electricity to separate it. So what we've been doing is collecting oxygen and hydrogen in these tubes. The negative electrode has been collecting hydrogen. The positive electrode has been collecting the positive electrode has been collecting oxygen. If we do this right, I should be able to prove to you that that's hydrogen in there. Didn't work. Okay. Let's see if we can prove that it's oxygen. That's the oxygen escaping. That's letting the splint